So those of you that don't know me, so I'm the Patient Access Manager, which is probably one of the oddest titles I've ever owned in my career, and it's like the bed manager in the traditional hospital role. So my responsibility really starts and ends with the hospital flow, so I don't tend to have any flow responsibility for in the community or mental health. And I was thinking about what I would call this presentation, and my first stab was that I was going to call it Beds, Bravery and Bedlam. And I kind of thought in a way that that's how it feels often, and Vicky touched on it, that I'm not always or often or any time the most popular person in the hospital, and my team pick up the phone and they hear the groan on the other end, because actually I'm generally delivering difficult news. You're having another patient and another patient, and can you move this patient from here to there? Which is why I ended up with deciding that what I really did was I feel like a grandmaster in chess. So we all the time, you're constantly looking ahead to what's coming, what's going, what are we doing, and how are we playing that. So, and I did hear one of my senior colleagues say that, I kind of even stuff people into cupboards and then bring them out and try and get them onto the ward, to do anything to try and keep flow running through. So why does that fit in with patient safety and the Safer Everyday agenda? Because actually, if we don't manage flow well throughout our acute service, then we are putting our clientele and the island at risk. So what are we talking about with safe hospital occupancy? Crikey. So the standard is about 85%. That comes from NICE. So that's what we would aim to look for, as it gives us a 15% capacity for discharges and emergency admissions and elective admissions. If you look at the data from the UK, they've been running in the 90%, and that's been probably conservative. I should think some hospitals run at a much higher occupancy, and so do we. So what I was thinking was, well, what did we look like over the last year? And actually, our overall occupancy was around 74%. And you think, well, that's really good, isn't it? In fact, that implies, does it not, that we are underutilised. Well, I can tell you, I'm actually only about 21, really. So we are definitely not underutilised. We are oddly utilised, perhaps. So it's a bit, those of you old enough to remember Morecambe and Wise, it's a bit like having all the right beds, but in the wrong place. And we often experience that. And I've just come away today, it's really ironic, I feel that I'm talking about this today. So I've come away today and I've just left the hospital predicting at a 97% occupancy this afternoon. And 3 of those beds that we've got, I can't put anybody in at all because they are elective orthopaedic beds. So if you looked at, so the people that would look at some of the occupancy rates and they'd say, yeah, but Carol, look, really, it's only 74%. There's a huge percentage of those that you can't play with, that you can't use. And so I've often seen us running at 80% with actually no medical beds at all, no medical capacity. So that's not safe. And I'll come on to some of the other bits around that. The other thing I think that's particularly special to this kind of environment is that we have only 110 beds. That's really tiny for an island that by definition we haven't got anywhere that we can go to. So in my old life in the NHS, we'd close our doors if we had to, and we would divert somewhere else, who loved us dearly for that, but we did have the option to do that. Well, we don't close our doors, do we? And hospital, of course, is the default position on this island. So there isn't really anywhere else for people to go. So if you're not well, they'll come to hospital. So other services can say, we can't cope with anymore, but we'll always have to find somewhere for people to go. So I'm a bit cautious around those percentages, because I think if we started today at 85 and within a couple of hours we were up to 97, and as I left it, there was at least another 5 people in DED that I think we've got to try and find somewhere for them to go today. So you kind of have to context it, and for me it's the narrative that brings it to life. It's not the numbers. But staying with numbers for the minute. So what are we talking about in terms of what we put through those 110 acute beds? So elective admissions, 3,139 in 2018, nearly 11,500 through day patients, so a massive throughput of our community through day patients. 3.5 emergency admissions, and out of all those, roughly about 117 that we attribute to HSC for postponements. I'm slightly cautious about that data. We've got some work to do around our data sets for that. So, but in terms of why do we postpone, we'll postpone because there's no ward bed, no HDU bed, theatre overruns, that kind of thing. So actually we're using those beds over and over again. We have got a tiny amount of beds for a lot of our population. And I think the other thing to context this is that we know we've got an ageing demographic. So, you know, our population isn't going to get any younger. And I just think as an island, we have to be really cognizant of that and consider what we need to put in place to manage that. I was in ED, I think last week, and I was looking at the people that were sat there, and the youngest sat in ED of the 8 patients was 85. And they were between 85 and 95. We're regularly getting people in over 100. And they're going through surgery, and you know they're doing really well, but you know they're very, very elderly, frail people. So there's lots of things to consider. So I've been doing this job just coming up to 2 years now, and so some of the things that we've done since I was put into post was we immediately brought in the 3 o'clock emergency department meeting. So when I first came into post, what we realised was that when we were starting to worry about occupancy levels in the hospital, we didn't really have any mechanism to flag that up until about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we have some other safety issues around, well, what do we do then? So we brought in the 3 o'clock bed meeting. So one of my team or myself goes down to ED and we look at what the whole picture looks like at 3 o'clock. What's likely to come in? Where have we got capacity? Most importantly, where do we have to move people to if we need to create it? So between 3 and 6, we can start making those moves happen rather than leave it till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, which is really awful for the patients. We've developed the escalation policy. So as part of the work we've been doing is actually, well, what do we do next? So if we run out of medical beds, what's our next step? And we RAG rated our percentages. So when we get to 95%, that pushes us into the black, and that starts a particular pattern around our escalation policy. What we've learned, I think, through that is what you really see on a small hospital is that the occupancy levels do that. So you can be at black at 8 o'clock in the morning and green at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or the other way around, because of the small numbers. So we've learned a big lesson, I think, because we were really reactive when this first came out, and we had the world and their wife were all coming in and going out, and then, you know, that was actually not really very helpful. So what we've learned now is that we're looking at a sustained red or black, so sustained occupancy over 91% up to 100%. If that is going on, predicted to go on for more than 24, 48 hours, then we call in the great and the good to kind of help us try and do that. Because most of the time, the operational team can manage that flow well. We've also added a decision-making tool. So safety briefing happens every day at 8:30 in my office. And then as part of the escalation, should we start worrying about our occupancy, we put meetings in throughout the day that everyone comes back again and we look at the picture and what decisions are we going to make. And what we realised was that we were making very, very big decisions. And we were risk assessing our patients, we were risk assessing where they were put in the organisation, who could go home, who could outlie, could we send anybody your way, could we, all that kind of stuff was going on. But actually we had no record of that. And so we developed the decision making tool so that we can look back. So if we have incidents or complaints or just everyday learning, we can look back and say this was the picture at the time, and we can now look back and see why we made that decision. And that's been really helpful, and I've noticed now that these tools are being used a lot more in managing incidents and managing complaints, and people are relying on the accuracy of them. Part of that accuracy data as well is around our outliers. So I've been keeping a really careful eye of late of who is outlying in the hospital out of their specialty area. And so today I think there are 17 patients that are not in the area that you would wish them to be. And we just need, again, to be aware of that, so about the risks and the decision making around that impact. We've also moved on to electronic data sets, so we're trying to do much more. We're moving away from paper onto our electronic system so that we can start to kind of make more sense of what it's telling us. And we are desperately trying to improve the use of track care. And I know there's a big bit of work that I think track's going to be great if we could get it to do it what it wanted, but we've still got too many workarounds for it to be useful. So I think the word bed manager and insomnia probably goes together, and I do often sit up in the middle of the night and worry about it. And I thought, well, in terms of safety, what is it that I really worry about? And I worry about the demand versus capacity all the time, and I think probably my team and we probably spend our life looking at what's in, what's going, what's coming, what might come, what's the weather like, are the planes not going to be able to come, all that sort of thing. And I'm probably looking a week ahead at a time in terms of elective admissions, and when it's really bad, I feel like I'm virtually camped in ED trying to work out where we're putting people, and that's really stressful on the organisation, because it puts everybody under pressure. And I feel like I constantly beg people to say, can you do this? Do you mind if you do that? Can we try and work this around? And I'm sure, as you will attest to, that can be really wearing when you're trying to look after a cohort of patients, and then someone's asking you to move everybody around. The other thing that's been a challenge is the prioritisation categories for elective admissions. So people can be prioritised for a number of reasons. I perhaps naively expected that they were prioritised on their clinical priority. So I would expect people with cancer or likely to be seriously sick if they didn't get an elective admission done to be the P1s. But what I realised, that wasn't always the case. So sometimes they were prioritised because it was the only day the surgeon could do. Sometimes they were prioritised for other reasons. So we've redevised the prioritisation categories to try and take into account the lesser known people that would always get cancelled. So some of our orthopaedic cases, they were always categorised as a P3, but actually when you looked at that, they were highly likely, some of them, to fall over and fracture. So actually they shouldn't be a P3, they should be a P2. So we've recategorised some of those, and we're just in negotiations with MSG about whether they agree, because obviously they're the ones that prioritise. So once MSG and us agree on what those prioritisations look like, that means then I feel confident in the decisions we make should we need to postpone. So that was the other thing I learned a really hard lesson was that I took the information that was given to me from MSG as correct and postponed a patient on actually incorrect information. And you do something like that once, don't you? You don't do it again. So that's why I feel a bit more confident now that this information is coming through. So then should we have to postpone, if we've got one bed and two people, which one's not coming in, you feel like you're able to make a better decision. The other thing I worry about is the patient experience measures, because actually it's really difficult, isn't it? It's easy, I suppose, to describe it as chess, because that's an inanimate something going around a board, but these are people and their lives, and they get worked up about coming into hospital. They've got their daughter coming in from Scotland, they've got someone looking after the dog. It doesn't matter what it is, this is a big life event for people, and for them to feel that somebody casually bowls up and says, I'm sorry, you can't come in because we haven't got a bed, is a really hard place to be. And my team and I have some really hard, difficult conversations with people. And my honest opinion is it's much harder on us when they're nice to you than when they're horrible. Because when they're really sweet and they say, well, darling, it's all right, don't you worry, I'm almost in tears. When they're yelling at me, you kind of have some resilience around that. So that's really difficult. And there's always a judgment call about what do I do best? Do I phone somebody the night before and warn them? Do I wait till the morning? And all of those kind of, and I can tell you I've got it wrong every time. So for some people, they wanted to know the night before. If I've told them the night before, they were stroppy with me because I'd given them a sleepless night because they thought they might not get it in the morning. So it's a really difficult thing to call. And the other decision is deciding on the patients to outlie. So who do we put on their non-speciality wards? And that's really difficult because we know in terms of good patient outcomes that they are better looked after on their specialty. And so I can stand here and say that we've had to outlie lots of our elective orthopaedics onto Vic, and they have a longer length of stay because they are out of their specialty. The same with our medical patients. And you know, our consultants, although we are a little hospital, I think they do feel like they go on safari to find their patients sometimes, and they forget where they are, and so the patients don't get reviewed as quickly or as often. So we have to be really aware of that, and we have to think about all the risk factors about why we do what we do. And the biggie that really keeps me awake, I think, is around the availability of the community services and the impact that it has on our inpatients. And the particular cohort of patients that I find most distressing is the patients waiting for packages of care. Because these are patients who, at 48 hours or so in hospital, you're starting to become institutionalised, you may lose muscle tone, all of those sorts of things. Your independence starts to decrease the longer you're in hospital. And then you've got a window of opportunity to get people home. And we've currently got 10 people sat in our hospital beds waiting for packages of care. And that makes me sad, because actually these are the people that I would really like to, you can get them home. We could be able to get them home. And for a percentage of those, I know they won't go home. So the challenges that I've noticed since I've been in post, well, the biggest challenge for me is the systems and processes, and the fact that we are two organisations. I come from the NHS, imperfect though it is. We're all in one place, whereas we've got MSG and HSC caring for the same cohort of patients, and that does present a challenge. What I like to think is that we put the patient in the middle, and we work the processes and the systems around that, and that works well and not so well, depending. It's island medicine, so the other thing we have to be really aware of is what do we do? Should we run out of beds, or should we need to medevac people off? So we have to be always aware that we can't just send someone down the road to another hospital, that we've got to fly them off or boat them off, but we generally fly them off. The configuration of beds against specialties has been a real trial for us. It's better already now that we've got the 2 medical wards. That's certainly helping, but we still have a huge number of medical outliers. So we haven't got that quite right yet, but we're definitely on the right trajectory, I think. I'd like to see an increased use of day patient beds for private patients. So I don't think that the day patient should be on Vic Wing. And I'd like to think about the agreed number of elective beds that are needed per day. So we have got an agreement with MSG, so I know exactly what we will offer. And I also worry about when I don't think we're going to be able to deliver that, particularly around the winter pressure times. And the other challenge I find, and you can tell me if you think I'm barking at this point, but I think the public expectation on Guernsey is really, really high. And coming from the NHS, I can see that the standards of care on this island are really good. People get really good care, they get really well looked after, and they are really cared for. But they have very, very high expectations of what that will look like, and that sometimes I think that can be a challenge. So the things I think that we could improve, I think we could improve our community resources. I think we are crying out for nurse-led pre-assessment. I see patient after patient come through the system who should never have got through the front door for surgery because they weren't well enough, weren't prepared enough. Somebody a couple of weeks ago turned up with no equipment at all, didn't bring his crutches and thought he'd stay in bed for a month after a joint replacement. So his idea of what he was coming to and the reality were completely different. I'd really like to see the introduction of enhanced recovery in medicine and surgery, and I'd like to see the development of a shared decision-making model to move away from the medical model of management to bringing the patient much more into the decision-making about the decisions they take around their healthcare. I'd like to see the increased use and times of day patients unit, and I'd like to see our patient transport service increase their time frames, because we've currently got, they're there between 8 and 4, they'll do 2 patients a day for us, and 3 on a Friday, which I think limits our ability to move people through the system. So this is Does this mean anything to you, any of you sat here, Freedom to Speak Up Guardians? Just to Julia, little bit to you? No? Okay. So in my old life, I was a Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. And for a little while before I decided to throw in the towel and move over here. And I was very struck when I first came here, and as part of my induction I was listening to Mark Degare talking about how much he wanted people to feel able to say things about their work life, their colleagues, stuff that bothered them. It was important that people felt safe and able to raise issues. And I was really struck by that, and so I emailed him and said, do you know about this? Is this something we've already got here? So it must be 12 months ago, Juliet, wasn't it? I did a little presentation, which is more or less this, to CMT. So the concept of a Freedom to Speak Up Guardian is that somebody acts as an independent and impartial source of advice to staff at any stage in raising a concern, with access to anyone in the organisation, including the chief executive, which in our case becomes the chief officer, or if necessary outside the organisation. So why would we want any of that? We've got HR, we've got our senior managers. You'd think actually this is something that you wouldn't really need. And the reason this came about was out of the Francis report from 2014, which you all remember the joy and the distress and the upset that came out of Mid-Stars. And it was about how people felt they were treated. And the reason my organisation, my old organisation, took it so seriously is that we were an organisation under the spotlight for the mistreatment of whistleblowers. So there was a number of my colleagues that, and myself in fact, that had a particularly rough time over something. I lost my job, they lost their jobs, and in the end we lost our very, very senior team and it was all over the headlines and really sad. So it was about, it was for the NHS being able to raise concerns in the public interest with confidence that they will not suffer detriment as a result. So that was the key factor, that people were raising issues and then they were, there was some really sad cases as a result of it. And that appropriate action is taken when concerns are raised by NHS workers. And where NHS whistleblowers are mistreated, those mistreating them will be held to account. So it's really powerful, strong stuff. And the options that were laid out in terms of the NHS was that, so some trusts went down the rule of having one Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. So there was one person appointed, they were on a band 8, usually, always I think, and they were just appointed as a single position. My trust went down the role of having quite a lot of us. There was actually 15 of us, which had its downsides. But we were a network of people, and we were appointed from a range of professions, and also for a range through the hierarchy. So what we didn't have was lots and lots of very senior people being Freedom to Speak Up Guardians, because by definition you were going to start to run into trouble at their level. So we had people right across the range of workers in the organisation. And we were appointed in addition to our current role. So we had it added into our job descriptions, and we had protected time to fulfil that function. What I experienced that made it work was to have executive and committee leadership and oversight. So something like this won't work because someone like me talks about it. It works if our executive team say, we think this is a really good idea, we're going to sign up to it and we're going to own it and we'll run with it. I think it has to have an applications and selections process. So we all had to apply, we were all interviewed with HR, and we all had to say why we thought we would make good Freedom to Speak Up Guardians. And also it has to have clear leadership. So if we chose the model here, for example, of a collective, somebody has to lead it. It doesn't work when all of you just pile in, because that's what we tried to do, and it was havoc for ages. We had to have some clarity and identified leadership. That's probably as much as I've got to say around that at the moment, because I think it's very much in its infancy, Juliet, isn't it, as a concept. My experience was it was very well received. You had to be very careful about the parameters you set on how you managed it, and you had to be very careful about the supervision that you offered the guardians because of the nature of the stuff that they were handling. And people being humans and as they are, what you also have to be very careful of is people trying to use it as a way to get back at somebody. So there are lots of pitfalls, all of which you have to manage as part of the policy. But my organisation, and I say we had a particularly hard time, but they really